So just, whoever else is playing music, if you wouldn't mind stopping it now. Yeah. Let me pause mine as well. So I think that was a beautiful synchronicity to start this call off with, to have two different beautiful soundtracks playing at the same time. Did everyone hear the two playing at the same time? Yeah. So the thing is, it's two beautiful visions, but if we're trying to play out both of those at the same time in the same space, it's not as beautiful. And I mean, maybe there's moments where it comes together and it feels harmonious if it's in the same frequency, but if it's not, then we find it disharmonious and we're maybe not having such a good time. Which is a beautiful way to bring in this session, because we're going to be talking about that. How do we set a container that has a clear vision and a clear goal that's wanting to be obtained, and build all the structures that's going to be able to support that creation of that vision? Because this is really important if we're going to be creating these containers to set this foundation from the onset. Great, so that's kind of what I'm going to get into for this session. But before we get started, I want to open up the space if anyone has anything to share, any thoughts or questions from the previous session, so that we can just fold in from what we did last week. So last week we set kind of a quick roadmap of what we're intending to accomplish here. And we asked if there's any thoughts or questions, but I'm also getting feedback that there's a lot happening all at once, and it takes time for people to digest what happened in that meeting. And they didn't really have and feel like they had a lot of space to share in the space that it was shared with them, if that makes sense. So what we can do is each start of a session, we can have a discussion, any thoughts or questions related to the previous session before we get going on the new concepts. And this way we're also branching in previous learnings and picking up where we left off. So with all that said, I will then pause and open up this space. If you have anything you want to share, ask anything, just put your hand up and I will call on you.
Hi, I'll share. Hi, everyone. So happy to see you. Love these calls every week. Neil recommended on Discord that some of the alliance organizations share who they are and what they're doing. I don't know if now is the right time for that, if there's time in this call, but there seems to be a lot of organizations really eager to support these 13 projects. And there's some gaps in awareness around what those organizations do and how they can start getting support. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I love that. And if anyone wants to send me a blurb, or Sydney, Neil, I think you're the one that actually brought this up. If either one of you want to, that's the invite for those organizations, and I can send out an email, or you can feel free to do the same. And we can reach out to everyone and ask them to do so in the Discord. Yep.
Cool.
Stephen.
Yes, yesterday there was a meeting of the Strategic Anchor Council of Hypha, and we brought up the eco-village projects and how exciting everything is and what's going forward and what the next steps are. And Leonie was on that call, and Leonie said that she would be happy to help onboard any of the first 13 eco-villages that want to have hand-holding, mentoring to get their DAOs up and running using Hypha tools. So I'm just passing that message on. I've already passed it on to Vilcabamba, and they are, Finca Sagrada is going to take her up on that. But I wanted to pass that forward to everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Anybody else with any announcements or offers or questions from last week or anything of that nature? Imaginarium, Lewis.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say how amazing it is to actually finally land in this space. This is my first time being amongst this. So I'm just really keen and just wanted to say, here I am from the southeast of UK, and we're taking on everything we can, getting up to speed. It's brilliant to be here, and I'm just going to listen and take on board everything and engage where I can. So thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. more than welcome to hop along the journey and see where it takes us. Does anyone else have anything to share? Awesome. I'm noticing that not all of the 13 projects are here. So I'm recognizing that we might have missed a step on trying to find out the best time to get the most attendance of the 13 projects. So I'll do that this following week, where we might pick a new time for these calls, depending on what's best for the engagement of all the projects that are following this journey. So stand by for that. Okay, we're going to dive into today right now because there's a lot to cover and I want to leave room for enough discussion to happen. So let's get rid of our beautiful music and move on over to our knowledge base. So I will share a link to this, which you can see if you go to our regular one and go down to basic village template here, or just click on this link in the chat. You can find it. Now I'm saying village rather than project because all of our initial 13 projects that are with us, I would call a village. And what I call a village is it's just a project that's connected to a piece of land. So let me mute you all when you're coming into the chat or coming into the group. There we go. Yeah, so a village is just a project that's connected to a very particular piece of land, which all of the 13 projects this season are. So we're going to go over a template of what any one of these projects might need in order to succeed. And it's actually different from now. So the very first thing is we need a purpose, a very clear purpose. So this is part and parcel of what we were doing with those visions videos, is we're getting really clear on what it is we're trying to accomplish. So this is where we want to explicitly mention what our purpose is in every case that we can. So some examples up here, it's, one organization, its purpose might be to explicitly meet the needs of the members of that organization, in which case it's going to explicitly write all those needs out. So it's going to say, we're going to try to meet the food and nutrition requirements, or maybe we're going to try to meet the psychological safety requirements, or whatever needs you're trying to meet of members in that organization, you're going to actually write each one of them out and get clear about this. And why this is so important is if we're building decentralized organizations that are governed by the members, you need something really clear and tangible to fall back on whenever there's a discussion of what direction the organization or organism wants to go, or if there's a conflict amongst members deciding, what is the vision and values of this community. So you want to make sure you're getting really clear what they are from the onset, so you're attracting the right members to your organization and your community and your project. So this is going to be key for our crowd pooling campaigns, which we're going out there and we're asking for new members and new people and energy to show up to our organizations. We want to make sure we're attracting the right people and organizations to come and join us, rather than something that's going to be disharmonious, like the beginning of our call. And also, just real quick, you can watch this. You see at the beginning, all of these metronomes are all playing their own tune. They all showed up to the same space, but they're all over the place. But over time, and we're just going to skip ahead, they find their own pattern. And how this happens, there we go. You guys can watch the video yourself if you want to see it. It's beautiful. But the board underneath is that shared information layer is vibrating and putting them all in the same sync. So this container that we're all calling people to join, we're trying to find that sync and harmony. The vision and purpose, these policies are that surface that communicates the frequency amongst all the different members, in this case, the metronomes, such that over time, the communities come into harmony rather than disharmony and breakdown. So, back in, at least in the States, in the 60s and 70s, there was this big resurgence of communities wanting to do intentional communities. They recognized that the current system was failing. They just wanted to exit, and they're like, hey, we can build something new and better. They're calling them intentional communities and all sorts of different names at the time. But over 95% of those experiments failed. But fortunately for us, the 5% succeeded. They took great pains and efforts to actually articulate why they succeeded, write books about it, and put those processes and plans together. So we can actually learn from some of the things that they did and what patterns they found that were successful and helped them thrive, which is exactly what we're putting together here. So when I speak about the value and where this comes from, it comes from a whole bunch of different books that are on intentional community building and how to form containers for community to actually thrive rather than disharmony to take root. That was a whole lot. And I'm wondering if we're following, if you have any questions or anything right now before I carry on, or anything related to, this first important thing for the communities, which is vision, which we've talked about before. So this is the last, thing I'm going to say about that. But I'll pause if there's any thoughts or questions about
it. I put in the chat, I put the name of a book called Builders of the Dawn, written by my good friend Corinne McLaughlin, which was an examination of intentional communities around the US and which ones were successful and why.
Awesome. That would be probably an invaluable resource for a lot of the village builders that are showing up to these calls. Yeah. Cool. So what are the initial policies? So we're talking about setting up a decentralized autonomous organization. The very first thing you're going to put into your DAO, and actually I'll literally show what that looks like here. So if you are using the Hypha tools, so it looks like it's glitching. Then you can come to one of them. Actually, we're going to show you the Regen Civics one. And if you're using a different DAO tool set, they're very similar in nature. You're going to be putting up a proposal essentially. So we're going to go down and find Regen Civics. Here you go. So when you set up your organization, it's going to look like this. It's going to be blank. And what you get to do is you get to come over here and do the first generic contributions. And this is where you're going to be able to lay out your policies. So the first thing members are going to vote on are these initial policies that agree why they're showing up, what they're here to do, what rules govern their behavior, and how do they make decisions, which is what we're going to go over. So the very first step of setting up your DAO is establishing the basic rule set of engagement for the organization. So this is what we want to make sure every organization here has, which is what we're going to go over right here. All right, so the vital initial policies are the vision, values, and purpose statement. So what are you actually co-creating? Why are we here? What are we actually doing? And we want to make sure, again, that these things are, that they're exclusive in a way, that they're very clear what they mean. So you don't want to just set up an organization and say our vision and value, or sorry, our value is kindness. Like we just want to be kind. What does being kind actually mean? You can't just say you want to be kind. Everyone wants to be kind. Like it's hard to find someone who says they don't want to be kind, right? So that's not a very helpful value because you can't fall back on it in the case of a conflict. But if your community says, actually, we want to show kindness and we want to care for the human above, and more importantly, then we care for financial sustainability, for example. If your organization is saying, no, human first before financial, the bottom line, and we don't care if, we actually fail because we want to, choose the human over anything else. That is something that will actually be very different from communities, because a lot of communities will be looking at that and saying, no, that's ridiculous. We need financial sustainability, otherwise we fall apart. So that actually has to take precedence over, whether or not we're being kind to individual members. So that's a value that will be really important, because something like that is, very likely could cause a lot of conflict down the road. So the more clear you can get on how you are, what is your purpose? What are you here to do? And how do you want to do it? The less conflict you're going to have, because you're going to have more agreement with these initial policies and foundations. There's a hand up, so I will pause for any questions or thoughts. And if you have your hand up, I don't know who you are, so just unmute yourself and you can speak. Nope. Did I see a fake hand? Okay. Then I'll keep going. So the other one is patterns of co-creation. So this is where you can actually talk about how you create. Ours, for example, would be and you can actually use this, and I highly recommend it if you want. You can just fork what we put together here, take the pieces you like, remove the ones that you don't. But what you look at this is literally like the rule set of a game as you get a new game. So when you get Monopoly, for example, the first thing you do as a group when you sit down to play that game is you look at the rules and you say, okay, how do you play it? What is the purpose? What are we trying to do? How do we move the pieces, etc. So you need to understand the rules of the game. So this is what we call a handbook. Every organization needs one. It doesn't have to be 51 pages like this. It could be whatever size is good for you. But what's really nice about the one that I'll share here is this is longer and it has some conversation and discourse on the side. So you can kind of get a wider perspective of some thoughts and things that are going on with the creation of this document. But either way, we built this as a template for these, kind of rules of engagement. And this actually goes through and says what the purpose is, what people that the organization's actually looking for, what are they trying to solve? How do they compensate their members? How do you contribute? So when people show up and they're like, hey, I love the initiative here. How do I get involved? What's the process of getting involved? What does that look like, etc. So you put all of this into your handbook and we talk about what that looks like throughout here. And I'm just going to breeze through this because it's a lot and you're going to be able to follow up with this information during the week. So this is literally a step-by-step guide for your first step when you show up to Hypha. How do you contribute? How do you participate in the community? And then it shows the different steps that the members go through. So again, each community would want a document like this in order to help guide their growth and creation. Then you go through the process of how do you actually request value? What does that look like? What do the assignments look like? What are contributions, etc. So anyway, highly recommend this document as the next thing that you as a community are going to create and have ready for you before you can launch your DAO. Where am I? That's so many tabs. Let's see here. Yep. All right, along with that is your membership criteria. So some membership within the DAOs that we're offering, you might say we're a token-based membership, which is open. If you can access a decentralized exchange and you can buy this token, you are a member. And that's how a lot of DAOs are operating today. They're a completely open organization where anyone can show up, buy a token, become part of that community, and that's how they gain access. So I would call that, a token-based open membership organization. You could also have a badge-governed closed membership organization where you say, these 3 members in our community, they're our onboarding team. And they have the power to onboard new members in our community. They have their membership criteria that they follow. They go through the process of introducing new members, welcoming them, seeing if they are right for membership or whatever it is. You as a community get to issue a badge. That badge has the power and authority to invite new members. You could also have role-governed closed membership, where instead of giving that power to a badge, you say anyone can show up and propose to have a role. And if that role gets voted in, then they're a member of the community. So you can have it so that it's completely open, but still closed, if that makes sense. Anyone can propose to join. Maybe there's no criteria at all, and anyone can put up a proposal, and then it's up to the governance structure of your community to decide whether or not they're going to be a member of your community and organization. So these are the 3 basic ways that we have the capacity for now of governing membership in your community, and we believe they kind of cover all current use cases. So I'll pause there in case there's any other use cases or if any communities or projects here are like, hey, we were thinking of doing membership a different way, or anything connecting to membership policies and what was just discussed. I'm going too fast and too heavy, aren't I?
Hi, so I'm Martin. I'm here visiting with Reiki. I just wanted to jump in here because the Web of Trust protocol has been used in the DHO project, which is a cryptocurrency, which is a really interesting way.
Maybe come closer.
Yeah, a really interesting way of onboarding new members and managing membership when it's tied to a physical location. So basically the Web of Trust is you have a core, kind of like the badge system, where you have a core team of people, like say 5 people that initiate a community. And then basically those have each 100 certificates that they can decide to share with other people that are in the community, which are physically present there. So they send out a call, 20 people show up. They're from the actual place where the community is based. They're physical beings because you can actually check that they're real. They show up to the meeting. They all get certified. And if they have an account that is certified, they can themselves issue new certifications to other people. And so the network sort of propagates naturally from person to person, and it stops whenever the general community sort of, feels that they've encompassed a large enough group of people that represent all the people that may have an interest in a physical location or a physical piece of land. Obviously, for instance, if this network can spread infinitely. But if you have people that are living like 50 kilometers from your community, what is their interest in actually being part of the governance structure and voting on proposals? Probably none, right? So there's this kind of natural propagation of the network, which naturally also stops wherever the interest in the community or the piece of land stops. In terms of, if you're the neighbor of a community, then you have an interest in what's being built there because you might actually benefit from whatever's being built, whether it's a child's playground or a permaculture farm. And then you can have all kinds of systems to tweak that so that it doesn't propagate too far. You can, for instance, say that every time a new certificate is issued and the distance between the initial people and the propagation of the certificate is divided by 2. So the first people receive 64 certifications.
Maybe we can go into all of the details.
Yeah,
of it.
and so, I mean, that's just like, you can divide it by 2, and then it just sort of limits the growth of the network. But that's one system of propagation and management of membership, which is dynamic, which doesn't require this kind of manual control of a centralized body that verifies identity and all that stuff. And it can grow, shrink, and it's just alive in that way. So I want to share that. Thanks.
Well, so that would be how you become a member, is through a vouching process. So for example, 3 people vouch for you, you get membership. But then simultaneously, if you don't maintain that membership, it's always being taken away.
Yeah.
So every 3 months it might expire and you need to get vouched for again, or maybe every year or whatever the case is. So then you have a dynamic like homeostasis that shows the membership. So that's kind of like a soft way of holding membership. Why say a role governed membership? I'll share the screen again. By role and badge, these are hard ones. So the badge says, right now you are a member, there's someone who has that capacity, but then they also have the capacity to revoke membership. So maybe you have a policy in the community that if you break this policy, then you get your membership revoked. And then it's up to the membership team to be able to take this away. So opposed to, or instead of that membership, 3 people vouching for you, you get it. And after 3 months, if they don't vouch for you again, it expires. Now you might actually have a centralized body controlling membership. And there's no good or bad here. It's not better to be decentralized or better to be centralized or either one of them. It's just there's different uses for different scenarios that are right for your community. And these are the first decisions you're going to need to make, because before anyone shows up, you need to know, how are you being considered a member or not? Again, is it just because you buy tokens, you're a member, or is there a formal process you need to go through? So it's the very first things we need to decide here. There's a lot of good hands up, so I'll pause and we'll send it over to Sam.
Hey, thank you so much for opening all these topics, Reiki. Yeah, just wanted to say a word on how we are doing it, because we're building a platform for it as well. And I think our model can be relevant to a lot of people here. So basically, we're building this thing called Closer.earth, and that's the platform we're using to manage our village here in Portugal. So we're building, and the way that we see things is also a little bit like in between that decentralized and centralized way. So you have an application process to become a member, where you submit a form on the website, and then you have like this process where you get put in touch with a community curator. So that the community curator is a role. So that could be like a role in your DAO, for example. And then once you've been approved by the community curator, you get to actually spend some time in a property, which is in our case like 2 weeks, where that's kind of what the requirement is. You come and spend 2 weeks, so we actually get to meet you. And then the final step in the process to become a member is getting approved by the DAO. So a proposal is created by the community curator to add a member to the DAO. And yeah, so just wanted to bring that up. That's kind of our model. And then just on how it works after in practicality is the voting power of the DAO. We use proof of presence in order to do that. And so how does that work is anyone can buy tokens for our project, but only members can actually get the utility of the token by staying in the project. So the platform that we're in the process of developing is to fill that gap from being a member of the DAO to being able to spend your tokens in our properties through a very simple booking system. So kind of like Airbnb style, but we can, for only people who are members and who have tokens, they can then book their dates. And then the last step in that process is the more days you actually spend in the property, you accumulate proof of presence. So it's literally just like an immutable recording of those bookings on chain, which is something that we are then tying some governance rights to, because we assume that the more time you spend in the village, the more qualified you're going to be to actually take decisions regarding that village. And then that proof of presence has a decay over time. So the longer ago it was at use time, the less relevant it's going to be. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, epic for sharing that, Sam. So this is exactly what we're doing here. I know we just jumped right into the deep end, but we're going to be getting into the protocols of how we can govern membership and governance in our communities. So this is kind of what we're unpacking in all the following sessions. So for those of you who haven't been thinking about this for years, like it's clear some people here have, you know, don't worry about it. We're going to have time for this to be able to sink in, and we can actually slow down the process too. So that was some other feedback that I got, and we can decide as a policy in this community what we want to do. But it sounded like what I proposed last week was there was a lot of stuff in a short period of time and projects were feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So if that is the case, don't worry about it. We can slow down. We can take the time we need in order to do this right. Because definitely, as this is our first season, we're going to kind of be discovering this together. It's better that we do it right than we just kind of stumble through it trying to go really fast. So the real key here is we want to get all 13 of our projects into a really healthy form so that when we launch, we make it successful and everything does well. So with all that being said, that's our priority, and we can slow down if this feels like a lot. Walter, you got your hand up.
Yes, I feel like I'm still speaking an old language because, you know, Finca Sagrada, we have a LLC, which there'll be maybe 6 or 7, you know, shareholders in that. I guess there'll be, if we decide to go, you know, with the tokenization, we can change to that form. And then we also have an association where we'll have people who are not shareholders, but will make equal, when we make decisions about the farm, you know, like budgets and all that, within that organization, that's where we'll make the decisions. So anyway, we got along. I'm just bringing up the point that it's a huge jump, and I don't know, you know, there are also legal consequences of changing over. So it's going to be an interesting project for us to see how we do all this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting for all of us. The legal will be a whole chapter. So that was laid out last session. We talked about that being a whole space on its own, where we do the legal wrapper and how we make that connect. And also a lot of groups here have done a lot of research and design into what they want to do. And there are some that already work. So if this also feels, again, way too overwhelming for you, or it's not your particular, you know, passion or interest, then you can just copy one of the other organizations, ones that you find value in. For example, like when you're looking at the membership policy, you're like, this just seems like a lot right now, then you can just pick one of the best practices of an organization that you trust here. And I'm happy to also offer suggestions if you're just completely lost, you know, share with me some of your, you know, project, and you can help me understand your purpose. And maybe I can even suggest one of these for you that I think might be helpful. But then of course, this is up to you. And most importantly, you just need to have these to launch your DAO. They don't have to be perfect, and we're not striving for perfection. That'll, you know, cause us to go nowhere. We just need them to launch with so that you can fall back on them. And then you use the governance process of your community to continually evolve them. Like these will change over time as you know, learn what's right for your community. So don't feel like you're also locking into yourself something that's, you know, immutable and unchangeable. That's not how these DAOs operate. Unless you are using a DAO that is immutable and unchangeable, in which case you might want to spend a lot of time figuring out what these policies are if you're never able to change them again. Okay, with all that said, sending it over to John.
Yeah, just a comment. I think, and then a question. I think you really need to know what membership represents before you decide on which form of membership. So it's kind of an iterative process, like, does this actually represent ownership? Is, I think one of the questions that Walter was asking, in looking at the LLC, and I think at this point we're just talking about membership in the DAO itself, which may or may not have any assets that it literally owns yet or not. So anyway, that one comment, and the other question is, can you have more than one of these operating at the same time? So you can have membership token, that's just granted, and then badges that are all, that can and can't be revoked. Can you, or does it have to be, you have to choose one of the three?
Right. That's a lot. They're very flexible. For example, the tools that Hypha's offering, you can have a separate token that represents a share and that's attached to the LLC versus the token that's actually able to vote and govern and do stuff. So we actually get to separate those rights if you want to as a community, right? Those are a lot of tedious decisions that you might be making, but they are important still when you're setting this up. So that is vital. But that's why it was so important to focus on the vision and values of your community. What are you trying to create first? And then we reverse engineer all these questions to get to that point. Because if we try to go through all of this process without a clear goal in mind, we can get lost for a long time because there's a lot of different ways to go about this. So that would be the first one. So when we're thinking about membership, the basic discussion and the basic things being considered about a membership. What does it mean to be a member of your community? Likely that means that you have some financial interest in it. So if you're holding a token that represents financial value and that token can fluctuate in value or whatever, maybe that is a form of membership. You have some interest in that community. And that's kind of what financial interest means. You have an interest or a stake in making decisions. That could be the same thing. It could be separated. Meaning you could just issue a token that's just for the financial values tradable, and the governance token could be a completely different token that's not exchangeable, that can only be earned or can only be issued, or every person only owns one of those. So everyone has an equal voice in the community or whatever, right? So that's what's important. Membership means is who has an interest in the organization, who's affected by its actions, and who's making decisions for that organization and directing its outcomes. So that's kind of the very, if you're trying to break it down to the DNA of it, that's what we're asking here. And then we build all of these, tokens and everything on top of that to support whatever vision we're trying to achieve. And if your vision isn't currently possible, maybe that's a hint on what we should actually be building. And there's some builders here who might get inspired to build it for you. So don't feel limited by the available tool set either. These are very early days and we don't want to shoehorn in, ourselves into one particular outcome just because that was the tools that we had most available to us at the time. So we can be a little bit more exploratory here if it feels right for your community, which is a whole lot to say. But this is so important because if we're setting up organizations, inviting people to join us, we have to get really clear on what that means. Otherwise, you're going to be spending a lot of time trying to redefine that on the go. And that's going to be it's going to be frustrating. And it could be a lot of frustration that could be avoided. And it's going to be energy that's going to be spent, inwardly gazing and trying to solve that tension, opposed to actually serving your purpose. Or you might just not make it entirely. So this is also one of the biggest takeaways from all those experiments and intentional communities, is when they weren't really clear on membership, they tended to fail because a lot of people were showing up and being like, anarchy, what we're fighting against is this overpowering system. So a lot of people exiting that wanted no rules at all and wanted kind of like, free engagement, open communities. And what they quickly learned is that that doesn't work. It's disharmonious, just like the music at the beginning of this, and it's going to create a lot of conflict. And again, 90% of those experiments failed. So we don't want to have to remake those mistakes. Let's learn from that and let's say, okay, we have to be really clear on our boundary. And that does mean that we want a boundary. If there's decisions being made, we want to have a clear container of who's making those decisions. This is my bias. You can also try the open organization route, and all the DAOs today and in DeFi in that space are learning this right now too. that it's very difficult to do that. So anyway, that's why I'm spending so much time here, because it's like the analogy of sharpening your axe. You know, spend 90% of your time sharpening it and then only 10% of your time going after it. That's what we want to do here. If we spend a lot of time up front getting really clear about the games that we're setting up, then you're going to have a lot less conflict going forward. And I'll keep saying that because it's so important. So that's membership criteria. Who is a member? How and how do members leave? How do members leave is also really important to establish at the beginning. It is not something you want to make up when you want a member to leave. So it doesn't have to be perfect again, but it does need to exist when you set these things up. Conflict evolution process. And I say evolution because you're not just trying to resolve or avoid conflict. Conflict is how communities grow. You know, a nice analogy for this is putting rocks in a rock tumbler. You put all these unpolished rocks in there, you put them in there, the tumbler goes around, they hit against each other. And after time, all those rocks become polished and beautiful, and they're lovely to look at. It's kind of like humans and community. You're coming together, you're bumping against each other, you're scraping, you're polishing ourselves, and we grow as humans through that process. This is why a lot of people seek community, is because it is an evolutionary process for ourselves. So conflict isn't necessarily something you want to avoid. What you want to avoid is trying to avoid conflict, or exactly, you want to avoid trying to avoid it, because then you don't grow through it and you don't actually solve it. So it's really important to have a community that's, you know, looking at conflict, saying, yes, this exists, but you can also reframe it as a benefit in the community. And then it becomes like a game. You're like a challenging game where you're showing up, you're like, oh, okay, this is hard, this is tense, but this is why we're here. We're here to experience this conflict and grow through it. And if we're approaching conflict from that lens, then it's a lot easier to hit those moments and grow through them. So it's really important to set up a process up front that says, when tension and conflict arises, this is how we want to go through, you know, resolving and or evolving through that conflict. And make sure you have a policy. There's some templates, again, from all the eco-villages, intentional communities. Almost everyone either has one of these from the onset or eventually makes one up. So there's a lot of different examples that you can look at, and we can share some in the Discord, but one does need to exist. This is super important from the onset. Again, this is not something you want to make up when conflict exists. Okay, again, that was a lot, and that's a lot there. Is there any questions, thoughts, anything on this before we keep going? Anders.
I just found I found a lot of value through conflict, and in the same way that like you're leading this way, and it's like, hey, like this stuff isn't perfect, and we haven't like figured this out, and we're always open to refining this. But a lot of our different documents and everything else that we've done, we've gone through 5, 6, or 7 different editions to get to where we're at, based on what everybody else in the past has thought is a good idea. And we experience a lot less conflict now, but every single time it comes up, it's actually in service. So like creating a culture around, you know, appreciating conflict, because then we can come into more alignment, has been really like helpful for us.
And being super biased, I highly recommend as that culture and that frame as part of your conflict evolution process. And setting up the container from the onset to look at it like that, rather than saying conflict is something we want to avoid because we're a harmonious community and we don't fight because we're all good. That lens, like, I think it's, anyway, it doesn't serve communities and tends to always break down. So awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Anders. Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my question is related to just thinking through layers of membership and participation. You know, I know with Hypha tools, there's, you know, the 3 types of tokens. Is there a way to, or maybe as a group, we consider a Regen Civics membership or some sort of participation that allows people who maybe aren't living in the community, but are more peripherally involved or want to participate in like classes or events or things like that, just as we think through levels of membership. So I'm open to your suggestions on that, because I know, for example, with Finca Sagrada, there's going to be a small group of owners and voters. but potentially a very wide group of participants. And so I'm just looking for some insight on how you might think through that.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, let me share my screen here. This is our mirror board that Jamaica was helping us put together. Incredible. Oops, let me not do that. Oops, why am I not learning how to use this? Okay. Anyway, can we all see this membrane map right here? Yeah, multiple layers of membership. Also really important that you can set at the onset. You can have it really simple and say, if you own our NFT, you have financial and governance membership. You kind of have it all. We have one circle. You have this NFT, you have membership, you don't, you don't. You have one circle. Or you can say you have multiple circles. For example, you can say there's an inner circle, and these ones are actually making decisions. They hold governance tokens. And they likely hold, financial tokens too, right? We have another circle, and this is maybe contributors, and maybe they only own financial tokens, maybe because they bought them, or they showed up to a course and they contributed some value and they earned some. So you have a second layer. So this is kind of what you see here is you might have a core membrane right here making decisions. Then you might have like this is called primary organizational, but whatever, you might call it supporting membrane. And this is the supporters of your organization. So a very typical structure might have like 3 membranes, where you have a center one that's making decisions, an outer one that represents people who are actually contributing either financially or another way on a regular basis, and then a further one outside of that, which might be like alliances and community members who show up from time to time, and people who subscribe to your list or follow your social media or whatever. So that could be like a basic social membership structure as well. But that's a really good question. And you kind of answer that when you decide who is a member and who isn't, and you're working through those tokens. But this is probably actually a really good way of starting off, because it's a nice map that a lot of people work with, is write out your community like this, and different hold-ons and circles, and then talk about what each membrane means and where they exist. And maybe you only have one, which I highly recommend actually starting with, is start with one, put everything in that and says, does everything belong in one circle, or do we need 2? And then you just keep asking that question if you need to, and you keep expanding out until you have the number of circles that you need. One thing I should say, because I feel like we're also might be overcomplicating this, is we don't want to overcomplicate this. I said all of these things need to exist on the onset, but they don't have to be perfect, and they can be very basic. The point is they need to be here so that we can iterate on them, and that we still have a container to operate with it, if that makes sense. So they just need to exist, but don't try to make this perfect, because it won't be. For example, I'll show you the Regen Civics membership is in the center as the Regen Civics Council, who's making all the decisions. So that's the one representative from each alliance and organization. They're the only ones with governance tokens. They make decisions. Outside of that is the alliance organizations itself, who are holding Regen Civics tokens. So they have a financial interest in the outcome of the organization. Then there's the 12, this needs to be updated to 13, but either way, the projects each year who are also getting tokens should they succeed and actually launch their communities. So they also have financial interest. We could talk about whether both of these groups do or do not have voice, and how much voice they might get, and do all sorts of things. Because each membrane doesn't have to be completely clear. We don't need to say that if you're in this, you have all of the decision making. To add a little bit more complexity, you could say, actually, the Regen Civics Council they can veto everything. They have 51% decision-making power. But we're going to make sure the other 49% of the decision-making power is held with the alliance and organizations and the projects. So if they both agree on something and just a few of the council members agree, then an outcome is going to happen. You could do a lot of different things like that in your community, where you can get really clever on how you distribute governance, for helping achieve your purpose. But also, since there's so much that can change, it can go really awry. If you don't get really clear on how you're co-creating and what the purpose is, you can get lost a long time, kind of continually changing the game for the sake of changing the game, because there's a lot of competing interests. So I mentioned this because we're living, and then in the final boundary of, the final boundary is the global community of co-creators. This is people who might show up to the Regen Civics festivals and projects and actually contribute and earn tokens that way. but maybe they're not any part of any of these other containers. So that gives you an idea that you want to map like this for your project. That says, where are the memberships? Where do they lie, and what powers and rights do they have at each level of membership? I'll pause there because there's a lot on everything dealing with membership, which is probably the most important question as we're setting these things up. So thoughts, questions, any feedback from me? Am I going too wide? Is this too much? Am I going too fast? You know, that helps me as well be a better facilitator for you. Cool. Then if there's no questions or thoughts, then we can carry on our way. Do we all see this again? Yep, thumbs up. All right, so membership criteria, conflict evolution process. And then the final main thing we're going to set up first before we actually launch our DAO is the initial circles and roles and archetypes and quests. So circles is what we call like a department in our new organizations. I like to think of them as organs. If our community is a body, our body needs multiple organs within our organism in order to, you know, be able to move around and live and do stuff, right? So you might have let's actually go down to circles. So here's a couple examples of circles. What we call is the main circle. You might call this the heart circle. This is the one that's setting the rhythm for the whole organization. So maybe better to call it a heart if we're looking at an organism. Sociocracy, they call this, you know, anchor, and holacracy as well. And this is where the core team exists. And this is also the main circle. So if you're a one circle organization, this is the first one that exists. And if you're a team of 7, then you probably don't need any circles. Anyway. And then you might have circles for each particular thing in your community. So say you are a village, you might say that we have a food circle who's focused on providing food for the community. Maybe we have a housing circle who's focused on providing housing for the community, if that's something we're doing. Maybe we have a storytelling circle if we're trying to tell the story of our community. But how this, you know, the basic structure of this, how it evolves is if you're a small team, you start with an anchor circle, and then you have roles for each of these things. And then once you get to around 3 roles that are doing the same thing, then you form a circle, an organ for them to operate within. And the basic difference between a circle and not is a circle has its own governance process and its own budget. So just like organs in our body, they have their own biochemical processes, their own goal, and they have their own resources that they're using that are different from all the other organs in the body. That's what a circle means, and in a general term. So that's the first thing that we're going to be setting up in our structures, so that when members show up and they're like, okay, yep, you know, I want to be participating in food because I'm a permaculturist. So I know I go and talk to the people in food circle, and that's Bob or whoever that's running that circle or stewarding it, however you're running as an organization. So that's the next thing that you're going to want to look at. And then roles. So I'll talk about circles and roles before I pause. Some of this is coming from Hypha's own journey and setting up a DAO and trying to do that. So I'll give you some context. When we first set up, we said roles are anyone comes up with an idea of how they want to contribute to the community. They find a fair market value for that role, and then they make this new role and propose it to the organization. So what that actually looked like is someone came together, they were a marketer and they were a storyteller, and they wanted to do that for Hypha. Then they would first create a role that says, you know, marketer, it's going to do these 10 things, and a fair market value for this job is $157,000 a year or whatever it is. And then make that as a proposal to the community. But then what happened is we had 500 different roles that ended up being created. There was a lot of confusion. People didn't actually know what another role was because people weren't able to actually go through and read all 500 of these roles. And instead of it helping the community coordinate better to provide more context, it actually became more confusing. So over time, we developed this idea that, hey, we need to actually break this down into archetypes. So instead of having 100 different ways you can contribute, let's have maybe 5 main branches of ways you can contribute. And that's where this archetypes pattern actually came from. So instead of having, you know, 300 different roles related to developing all the different ways we can call a software engineer, software developer, coder, you know, like, and we actually had that. We had like You know, the wizard of integrity meant they were a blockchain engineer, but then we also had blockchain engineer. Then we had a software developer who was also working on blockchain. It was like we had 15 different roles talking about the same thing, and that was confusing. So we actually said, no, if you're actually building the physical, you know, tools that we're building, then you're a part of the building and developing archetype. In a little context, it was Annalo Smithson who did her PhD research on thrivability, and part of that research was actually looking at these fundamental change archetypes. And that's what these are inspired and, you know, coming from, is her understanding. And currently we actually haven't found any ways that people contribute to a project that couldn't fall under one of these categories. But anyway, so the first one's building and developing. So these are the roles that are actually on the ground, you know, constructing the village or, you know, building code or whatever it is. Then the next fundamental way of contributing is researching and architecting. So these are the roles that are out there learning for the community, building the structures. This is actually a lot of all the catalysts that are here on these calls. You know, it's the people who are attending these calls, you know, listening to these different structures, putting up ideas on different ways of doing governance in the community, etc. They're the ones that are researching and architecting the community structure itself. Or even the project, maybe they're the ones, you know, the permaculture architects, etc. Facilitating and space holding. So this is the people who are holding space for the community to come together. They're the people. They're the ones that might actually be doing the membership process, inviting new members into the community, helping them understand how it works. They're the ones facilitating calls and making sure they're held well, etc. Then there's the catalyzing and connecting role. So this is the one that might be introducing new partnerships, building alliances, starting new things. This is like launch teams going to a new place to set up a new project. You know, so these are the catalyzers who get things started and they make new connections. And then finally, you have the storytellers and the communicators. These are the ones telling the story, making the art, you know, etc. You guys get that. So that was the 5 basic categories, and we offer that to you as projects if you want to simplify this. Say, okay, we have these 5 basic archetypes, and this is the 5 different ways you can contribute to our project. If you find these 5 limiting, of course, you can have more archetypes in your village or not. I guess the final thing with this is then that we actually had to solve the problem with salary and how much people are getting compensated. Because if people, every different role had a different salary attached to it, that also started causing conflict. Because what's beautiful is in these transparent organizations, we can't hide salary. So the old paradigm kind of has the benefit of that because you're not supposed to talk about salary and no one knows what each other's are getting paid. So there's a huge, you know, inequality there, but nobody knows about it. So nothing gets done. But here you don't have that luxury. You can't hide how much everyone's getting paid. So if there is a disparity, that is going to come up. So before you get started, you want to have a really sound and clear policy of how people are getting compensated and why. So there's something to fall back on and point to for why someone's getting more. And the answer can't be, well, because they know so-and-so and they were a better negotiator, so they got paid twice as much as you. You know, that's typically in the old corporate world, how that type you kind of work out. But anyway, that luxury doesn't exist here. So there's some different ways you can go about doing this. Hypha created this idea of complexity bands. And we said the more complex the role is, the harder it is to do, the more mental capacity it takes or physical capacity or whatever it is, the more experience you need in order to get it done well, the more you're going to get paid. So we looked at a role and actually judged the role on the value of that role. And when I keep saying role, it's because the role is not the soul. So when the community is judging and saying the value of something, we're not talking about the value of a person. We're talking about the value of that role and that role's contribution to the community. And this is so important to, you know, set up from the beginning, because otherwise you're going to run into a lot of conflict where someone comes up and they say, hey, I want this role, I want to get paid this much. And the community says, no, we think that's too much money. What that person hears often is, oh, I'm not valuable. They don't see the value in me. They don't like me. I've been rejected. I'm sad now. When the community just wanted to say, no, that role was too expensive. We love you, but maybe that role needs to be at 130. So that's why we separated the role creation from the role assignment. Is we say first a role, and roles are general and anyone can apply to a role. You create a role that has a contribution to the community and a certain compensation that that role is going to get. And then when someone applies to that role, now the question being asked, is that person going to fill that role well or not? It's very binary. We're not judging the value of that person. We're not telling them we're accepting them or not. We're just saying, are they a right fit for that role? Or maybe they're a right fit for another role or no role at all, right? I know this is kind of deep, but it's super important in order to avoid a lot of interpersonal conflict going forward, is to separate role and that contribution to the community from the soul of a person. Further, what this does is I think it's closer to reality, where every human is multidimensional. We have a million different ways that we could show up in a community. We have a million different roles that we could play. And likely, we're going to play different roles in the community at different times, or multiple roles in the community. So what we're saying is a human is not the role. Anders isn't, in charge of the organization. Anders might be playing a role that's coordinating the organization right now. So his role has that power, but he himself is not holding all of that power. And it's really important in communities that are, wanting to be egalitarian to do that. And in this way, you can have hierarchy that's healthy, because then the hierarchy is a hierarchy of roles, not a hierarchy of people. And that hierarchy could, and I suggest should, change. Because then if it stays that there's a hierarchy of roles and the same people fill those roles all the time, then it becomes a hierarchy of people. But for example, other cultures that have existed on this planet, they learn this. And in summer, they had a certain hierarchy. But in winter, they purposely inverted the hierarchy. So the ones that were calling the shots in summer were the ones that are taking orders in winter. So they had this clear concept of roles that you could be in charge for now, but know that I'm going to be in charge later. And what this ensured is that people didn't abuse each other, because if I abuse them being in charge this season, then they're going to probably abuse me next season when they're in charge. So, I'm not going to abuse people. So that, it balanced the power. So that is really important, is you can have hierarchy in your community, but make sure, my opinions here, make sure that's a hierarchy of roles, not a hierarchy of people. And this is how we accomplish that. So then those hierarchy could be paid different if that's how your organization operates. Or you can use a classic way and say, if you're an elder, you're going to get paid more than if you're a journeyman or an apprentice or whatever. So you create some different bands that if you're a lower band, you're getting paid this salary. If you move up that band structure, you're going to get paid more. Further, you can introduce badges to get bonuses. So if someone's coming with a particular, wisdom or something that would typically mean that they're going to get a bonus in the old system, so they feel like you want that in your community, then you can create badges that give bonuses as well. So that a person's total compensation is all the badges they're holding, what band they're in, and all the different roles that they're playing. So that was a lot. It's always a lot. So I'm going to pause there if there's any questions or thoughts on any of this. Cool. So to try to simplify this then and ground it for everyone who might be feeling like this was way too much. This is how we would set it up. We would go through this process where we have the initial roles and archetypes, and you can follow what Hypha did as a template. If you're liking how I'm sharing it, and if my biases, how I'm sharing them, align with your biases, then maybe you might enjoy the template we put together. In which case you can simplify this. You could start with those 5 archetypes. You can have a few basic circles of your organization, and you can copy some of these policies that we have or that was formed throughout our process. Next, as you go down this, there's a nice little thing that says select one. You can decide which one of these is right for your community and then actually track that. So I believe that these capture all use cases, but let me know if there's a missing one and I will happily add it. So there's the one for becoming a member and then losing your membership. Then you can go down to governance policies. So this is how are decisions going to be made in your organization. So there's something that we created in Hypha that's called like a half-life. It's a voice decay. And what we wanted is that voice moved over from new generation to new generation. And how this happens is those who had earned voice, a while ago, it becomes less valuable over time. And we do this by decaying. So if I earned 100 voice tokens today, they're only going to be worth 50 voice tokens, a year from now, and 25 a year after that. So you can, in your community, have a decay of voice if you want to have that process of transitioning voice to new members. Or if your community is just everyone has one voice, then it doesn't matter, and everyone has the same vote, and you don't have this at all. And then it's the same question for how does voice, go away to how is voice issued. So if you want, again, everyone in your community to have the same voice, this doesn't apply to you. But if you're a community that says we want to be governed by those who are contributing the most, which is how Hypha said about it, is we said, actually, one person, one vote doesn't actually make sense because some people have way more at stake and are contributing way more to the organization than others. So we want to be able to capture that because we assume that that wisdom is more valuable because they have more context, they're contributing more. So that's the basic parameter that we set up, is the more you contribute, the more voice you earn. And again, on the onset, this might seem unequitable, but it could be actually more equitable because it's more equitable to balance the, the energy exchange that's taking place. If someone's entire life is based on this organization, they live there, they work there, their entire income is based on it, should they have the same voice as someone who's just contributed for a summer and helped build the house? Or do you say that the person who contributed a little bit doesn't get any voice at all? So it's really difficult to say that anyone is better than the other. The reality is they're going to be different for each organization, and each organization has a different bias to what they believe is most equitable or right for their culture. But this is something to establish also on the onset, is do we give every person the same voice or do we stagger that voice? And if you decide you're going to stagger it, how are you going to stagger it? Are you going to stagger it by saying that we're going to have badges that give you bonuses based on experience and expertise? And we say, yep, if you have a university degree, we're going to give you a badge. If you've taken a permaculture course, we'll give you a badge. You can do that. It's weird. And that can mean a number of things. You can have an objective way of saying these people are, let's give them more voice in our organization. That could also look like, and some groups want to do this, is they want to have a voice of nature badge. And this badge actually can veto any proposal. And the person holding this badge, their role is to speak for nature. So if something is going to harm nature in any way, they can speak for that and represent nature. And this community says that's vitally important for us. If anything's going to harm nature, according to the person who's holding its perspective, then they're going to be able to veto any proposal. So, that type of structure can exist for how is voice distributed in your organization. And you also get to get really particular with how you do different forms of consent or consensus. I guess it's not full consensus, but you could do, 90%. You could say in our organization, if 90% of people agree to something, then it can pass, and only if 90%. So it's really close to consensus, but it's not quite there. So it has a lot of similar benefits, but maybe it doesn't have the fallback of people being able to block something kind of indiscriminately. Or you can say, nope, we want full consensus. But wherever you find yourself on that band, and this is tweakable. So if you launch your organization and you want to start with consensus, but you find that's unworkable, you can move it down to, 95%. You're able to adjust that. And this is actually something intentional communities learned. And there's a fancy name for it. It's called N Street consensus, where N representing however many numbers they want to put in there, where we say 2 people have to, block it before it actually is a block, or 3 people have to block it, or whatever. So you can actually increase the threshold of blocking rather than just one person can. Because that's what scares people with, full consensus sometimes. So anyway, I'm going to pause there because we only have 10 minutes left, and I would love to be able to go around and give people time to check out. But what I wanted to, present here was a ton of information, because I'm trying to plan everything at once, because as we're going about this organization design process, we kind of have to hold all of these elements in our mind at the same time, because they're interrelated and they're going to affect each other. So we're designing a new organism here, and we have to kind of have an understanding of all the different organs and functions and how the organs function with each other from the onset. Again, it can be a very basic understanding of it, but those structures need to exist. So I've kind of brought awareness to all of them today, and I know there's a lot, so it's going to take some time to sink in. But over the next few sessions, this is what we're going to keep going over. Is we'll go over these ideas, we'll discuss any questions any of the projects or communities or anyone here has. We'll work through that, and then over time, once the projects feel like they've come up with good answers for themselves for each one of these, then we'll move into presenting. And then each one of the projects will present what they've decided for their membership criteria, how their token policy is going to work, what conflict resolution policy they chose. And as projects are presenting each one of these different elements, we might learn from each other, be like, oh, yep, that's really good, we're going to adopt this. So that's a continual evolution process as we refine our policies. And we'll do that as many times as we need to until 9 projects are like, yep, we're in love, we're ready to move on. Then we'll move on to the next chapter of our journey. So that's a little bit of a roadmap that's carrying us forward here. Now we'll have some time for checking out any type of feedback or anything you have to say, and any amendments to that roadmap too. Fully happy to hear them now, or you can just send me a message after. Whew. Susan, you did not unmute yourself before you started talking, but definitely take the helm. Let me ask to unmute you. There you go. Could you say that again, Susan?
Yeah, I just was very impressed. This has been a huge amount of work. You've been very good at getting it across to us. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. It's been 10 years in the making, and I'm really motivated right now because I want to live in these. So, I'm thanking you because y'all are the ones out there building them. So I couldn't be more grateful for all of you existing too. So I'll reflect that back. Deeply appreciated. Anyone else? Or should I just call on some people because I want to hear some voices here?
Well, everyone's muted, so I think you should unmute them, okay?
All right, we're gonna, is that even possible to unmute everyone?
You can also unmute yourself, Susan.
There you go. Anyone can speak up right now. And please, if you have any comments on how this is going, because I'm sitting here being like, am I going too fast? Is that why we're all quiet? Or is we just need to have this land and sink in before we have any questions? Any of that feedback's great because this can continually refine how I present to you. Stephen.
Yeah, so Reiki, I think at the end of the day, from my discussions with individual eco-village representatives, many of them are looking for mentorship. And somehow in Regen Civics, we need people to volunteer to mentor other eco-villages. And you can't do it all. Even with these comprehensive discussions, which are quite helpful, for somebody who's sort of newer to it, like Walter and Susan, is pretty overwhelming. So Leonie did volunteer to help them specifically, which I'm going to take her up on that. But I think we need some mentors to help people as they start implementing this in the eco-villages as they go forward.
Couldn't agree more. And I'm even seeing that as one of the first roles of Regen Civics is someone who is helping projects get set up. And that would be when we're approaching to get funding, that's what we're talking about. We're funding people to be doing that work. So when we go to an institution, we're asking for money, they're asking how that's being spent. Some of that money is definitely going to be paying people to be helping projects get established. That's some of the deepest work that needs to happen. But for these projects, part of the 13 or any, I'd love to see a lot of them become incubators themselves. So part of the business model of those organizations is taking applications for people who want to set up one of these villages, pairing those applications into cohorts of villages. So this is something we're going to learn collectively as well. What's the best cohort of people to bring together? So this is as we learn, the basic village organism needs to have these 144 roles or whatever. It's never going to be perfect, but we'll refine it. Then as people apply to this, then we can try to pair them into cohorts that'll work. Of course, no one's trapped into a cohort. Then they can come and they can pay and be part of actually establishing a village. And that could be really powerful for the first villages that are learning this. We're putting in a lot of the effort to learn this. We're establishing the templates. That could be our business model to pass that learning on to the next generation, so that they have a way of being able to come in here and kind of kickstart their self off and not have to go through all the deep work we're going through right now, right? So that's an invitation for projects to adopt that model. I think we need hundreds of these across the globe to facilitate the transition we're doing right now, or probably thousands.
I'll throw one other idea out there. I just was on a call with Legacy International, which is for 43 years been doing international global village work. They have a long, long track record of doing it. They said that starting this fall, they would be interested in getting in a dialogue with people that might want to come to their 100-acre campus and have an overall live in-place training session to help anybody from any of these eco-villages that want to come there. So I don't know how that's going to actually present itself and what form or anything, but they're working on this and thinking through it now. And we won't have anything on until October, but that's in the works.
Awesome. I'm going to call on a couple random people. And if you don't want to say anything at all, just keep yourself muted and I'll call on someone else. But Ollie, I would love to hear from you and if this is applicable to your project and how this is all landing. All right. Passing it on then over to Lauren. Love to hear from you. Trying to bring this.
Yeah, I'm enjoying listening to it all, and right now I'm like a kid in a candy store because I love kind of the notion of startups and creating, and so I'm hearing other people's examples is really helpful in how we think through how to organize a structure. And I want to like go right after this meeting and sit down with Susan and Walter and Stephen and Deb and John and Satya and go, okay, let's talk. How do we do this?
Oof.
So thank you. Great job.
I love that feedback. If after these calls you have a huge spurt of creative energy and you want to run off and build, that's exactly the energy we want to leave these with. So,
Woo!
Roberto.
Yes, thank you so much for putting together and have done all that work for preparation for this call. There is I've seen that of course there's a lot of these things that are already happening in the decentralized organization sphere that you imported into this. I was wondering and actually was curious, and I think that that's really a fundamental aspect here of how can we actually embed the things that are already being used or what the people are already thinking about, if there is anything that it can be added to this list so that then we could actually explore ways in which communities do it on the ground, because a decentralized organization is different than a community. In a community, sometimes you don't need to take decision, you don't need consensus even. But that's not saying that sometimes is let's say maybe let's not try to kill a fly with a bazooka, but yeah, definitely we will need to definitely choose. I just wonder if there are any things out there that already the eco-villages are already practicing and using that could be imported in that list. And as such, I'm thinking also if we would have more opportunities in the future meetings where we'd actually explore in a peer-to-peer way questions. So can we actually do it in breakout rooms? Because otherwise I feel that it's a lot of work on your side. Well, it's great if we actually figure things out as well together.
Ooh, I love that suggestion for breakout groups. And then I definitely want to bring them into next week. And in those breakout groups will be opportunities to share your models. So if you have anything put together then, or if it's just completely lost, then the breakout groups we can break out and actually share where we're currently at, what we're working on, what others are working on, go in a circle. And a large part of next session could be that effort. And then we can come back collectively and share any of the big hurdles and challenges and see if we can sense make on those together. Awesome. John.
Yeah, I would, along with that breakout model, which I really like, I would love to hear one project go through the whole process of what decisions they made about each of these points and why. Just one model all the way through, I think would be very, very useful. And then maybe break out into breakout groups where we could hear from each other what our questions are, or what model we're actually using. Be great way to go.
Ooh, I have a lovely idea then. We're putting together next session. We could start next session with one project of the 13. If any of the 13 are ready and they have answers to these, then you can present. And if you're pretty much ready, also let me know and we'll let you present anyway. So if one of the 13 projects that are part of this season are pretty close to ready and you want to present next week, awesome, let me know. If not, and one of the projects don't want to do that and no one feels ready, then I can do a mock one and make up a community and make up how they decided each one of the questions, and we can just do that. So we'll start the next session with a presentation, and then we can go into breakout groups and dig into it and start putting our models together. How do we like that idea? Awesome. So if you are one of those 13 projects, tag me in the Regen Civics channel itself under the org creation process channel, and let me know. We're a couple minutes over, but I still want to hold some space if there's any one last person who wants to speak or share before we go. Neil, I saw you unmuted yourself and I was going to call on you. Did you want to speak?
Sure. Well, I was going to volunteer Lala Gardens as a pilot, mainly because we're also like piloting, having that turn from a private ownership to a cooperative ownership, and piloting introduction of its own token, its own local currency using a Hypha platform, also creating a legal structure for cooperative ownership and tying NFT purchase to share ownership in a real estate project, and also tying in the Regenerative Living Institute to actually establish regenerative standards so that we actually are certified regenerative.
All right, I'm going to upgrade our the proposal one more time. Here's our Discord. Here is a channel or CoCreation right here under season 1. I put voting and picking for examples next week. I assume there might not be any. If there is going to be multiple and you want to present next week, put yourself here. If you want to vote for them, put an emoji, a thumbs up, and we'll pick whichever one has the most thumbs up. And they'll present at the beginning of next week. That way we're letting the community kind of decide who they want to hear from. Cool. Anything else anyone wants to share? Unless anyone has any changes to that plan.
Is it
Yeah,
possible?
well, maybe
Is it? I was just going to say, is it possible to hear from Gaia Union?
Okay. Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, I just wanted to share that we are also creating this kind of templates in Spanish. So if any Spanish speaking communities, and we are also trying to make the bridge having in both language. So I feel this is perfect complement.
That would be very useful for Finca Sagrada. Very, very useful. Where are you located?
Colombia.
I'll let you connect after because we're 5 minutes up now. I want to be respectful of people's times. Feel free to unmute yourself, say goodbye for today, and see you all next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.